Hi everyone, this is Miss Lasar, and today I'm going to be teaching you about photosynthesis. Make sure that while you're watching this lecture, you're taking notes in whatever way your teacher told you to take notes. Today, we're going to be starting not with photosynthesis, but with chemical reactions and energy transfers, two concepts we need to feel confident on before we can move on to the main focus for today, photosynthesis. We'll learn about the location of photosynthesis, the process of photosynthesis, factors that affect the rate or speed of photosynthesis, and the overall purpose of photosynthesis. So let's start with chemical reactions. A chemical reaction is a process where molecules are broken apart or put together. Let me show you an example. If I start with atom A and atom B, my chemical reaction might involve putting them together into this molecule AB. You can see that they're connected now. So we've got a specific term to describe what we start with and what we end with, and we're going to use these terms a lot. What we start with, our starting materials, these are called reactants. What we end with, these are the products. Our ending materials are products. So make sure you've recorded all of these definitions. And I would suggest that when I show you some more examples of chemical reactions, you choose a couple of these chemical reactions to draw on your paper so that you've got an idea about the types of chemical reactions you can see. So we don't just have to start with two atoms and put them together. We can start with a molecule, and our chemical reaction can involve breaking it down into separate atoms. We could start with molecule AB, atom C, and then we can rearrange things. We can end with AC and atom B. We could start with AB and CD, and we could rearrange those into AD and CB. So choose a couple of these to record on your paper. The important thing to notice is that the atoms that we start with are the same as the atoms that we end with, even if they've been rearranged. If we start with one of atom A, we'll always end with one of atom A. If we start with six of atom B, we'll always end with six of atom B, even if they've been totally rearranged into new molecule configurations. You've heard this term before last week, chemical bonds. You've seen representations of molecules like this, where our atoms are circles, labeled with letters sometimes just using colors to show us what they are, black for carbon, red for oxygen, white for hydrogen, for example. And you see lines connecting our atoms, and we told you that those lines represent chemical bonds. So chemical bonds, here's our definition, connect atoms in a molecule, and you can see chemical bonds as these connectors between atoms. So what's tricky, but what's really important to remember is that even though we've represented these as a physical thing or a line, these are not physical bonds or physical objects. They are energy holding the atoms together. Chemical bonds are not anything physical, it's actually just energy holding the atoms together. So, speaking of energy, let's go to our next topic, energy transfers. Let's start by talking about different types of energy. The first type of energy that we're going to be learning about is the energy that you probably think of when you think of energy, kinetic energy, or the energy of motion. There's a bunch of different types of kinetic energy, energy that's related to motion. The first is what you're probably thinking about, moving your body or moving an object. This is mechanical energy. When you pedal your legs, when you move the wheels of a bike, this is mechanical energy, energy due to the motion of an object or the motion of your own body parts. We've also got electrical energy, which is also a type of kinetic energy, energy of motion. This is energy from the flow of electric charge. You aren't seeing the electric charge moving, it's way too small for you to see, but the electricity flowing through our power lines is actually moving. Electric charges are moving. Thermal energy has motion involved. Think about, so thermal energy, heat energy, think about standing close to a fire. You can feel the heat radiating, moving off away from the fire. There's motion to that heat. Light energy is another energy of motion. Light radiates away from the light bulb that it comes from the sun. So think about the sun. The sun has both light energy moving away from it and also thermal energy or heat energy moving away from it. And finally, sound energy is the last type of kinetic energy we're going to think about. Sound energy is energy from vibrational motion. When the air vibrates, that vibrating motion actually is what you perceive as sound. So, all of these types of energy have to do with some sort of motion. But there's another category of energy that's really important to think about. And I like to think about it as stored energy. This is called potential energy. So, this is energy that's stored, it's not moving, but it's waiting to be released and probably converted into kinetic energy. So, some examples of stored energy are the energy in a battery. This is chemical energy stored in chemical bonds. The energy in a battery and the energy in an apple or the food you eat is the same energy. This is all energy stored in chemical bonds. Nuclear energy is another type of stored energy stored in atoms' nuclei. This energy is released in, say, a nuclear power plant or a nuclear bomb. Gravitational energy is energy stored in an object's height. This monkey will release the gravitational energy that's stored when they let go of the branch and fall to Earth. And finally, elastic energy is a type of potential energy. This is energy stored in elastic objects like a spring or a rubber band. So I've already started talking about energy being transferred from one form to another, like how this energy can be released in a nuclear power plant. And that's really the next thing we need to think about, how energy can be transferred between these different forms. First, the law of conservation of energy. Energy is never created or destroyed, it's just transferred from one form to another. Here are some examples. Light energy from the sun is transferred into chemical energy in a leaf during the process of photosynthesis, the topic of today's lecture. Chemical energy, so that energy that was stored inside of the leaf, is maybe not transferred to a different form, but moved from one body to another when an animal like us eats that leaf in the process of consumption. That means eating. We just moved that chemical energy from the leaf into ourselves by eating the leaf. Once we have that chemical energy stored inside of us, we can transfer that chemical energy into mechanical energy. When you move your arm, you're converting chemical energy from the food you ate into motion, the motion of you moving your arm. And finally, we can convert that mechanical energy into a different form of energy, like sound energy. If when we moved our arm, we used that to bring our hands together to clap, and the sound coming from that clap is sound energy. So again, all of these are energy transfers. We're not creating any energy, we're just transferring it from one form to another. And let me bring these two concepts together, chemical reactions and energy transfers, with a really cool chemical reaction that you're probably familiar with. This chemical reaction is what happens when we mix vinegar and baking soda together. So feel free to record this in your notebook. We set up our reactants on the left and our products on the right. Our reactants, our starting materials, are vinegar and baking soda, and they look like this: vinegar, our clear liquid, baking soda, our white powder. Our products that I'll show you in the video in a moment will be sodium acetate, water, and carbon dioxide. And so you can see in this picture what the molecules look like. So these are our starting molecules, and we're going to take those atoms, essentially pull them apart and rearrange them into new configurations into these new molecules. And let's watch the video to see what happens when we mix these together and they're transformed into these products. So we put our baking soda into our vinegar, and this chemical reaction is really lively. We get a ton of stuff happening, all of this foam, all of these bubbles. If the volume was on, you would hear a bunch of sound crackling and popping. And what you're seeing, this is all energy. We see energy transfers here. The energy transfers in this reaction include chemical energy from the bonds in these molecules being converted to mechanical energy. The motion of those bubbles is mechanical energy, and sound energy. Again, if the volume was on, you would hear crackling and bubbling and popping. That's sound energy. We also have another interesting energy transfer here. Heat energy is transferred into chemical energy. We actually take heat energy from the surroundings, and we're going to take that heat energy, we're going to put it into the bonds of these new molecules, the products. And that means that our glass is actually cold at the end of this, because heat energy will go from the surroundings into our molecules, which is pretty cool. So if you haven't already, because you were distracted by the cool video, take a moment to record our chemical reaction. So our reactants, vinegar plus baking soda, arrow, turns into sodium acetate plus water plus carbon dioxide, and the energy transfers that happened in this reaction. All right, now we're ready to move on to our feature presentation, photosynthesis. And we're going to start with an overview of the chemical reaction and energy transfers of photosynthesis, starting with the chemical reaction. We're going to set it up so that our reactants are on the left, our products are on the right. Make sure you've labeled your reactants and products as well. And our reactants or starting materials are 6CO2, which stands for 6 carbon dioxide molecules. I would record both of these labels. And here they are, 6 of this molecule. It's up to you if you want to draw a picture of the molecule or not, but at the very least, write down the chemical formula, CO2, and the name, carbon dioxide, along with making sure you've got these numbers down. Those are important. Plus 6 H2O, which stands for 6 water molecules. There they are. Plus light energy. So these are our reactants, our starting materials, and these will be converted into a set of products, which are our arrow to the right. And these things will be converted into one C6H12O6, which stands for one glucose molecule. It looks like this. It's a complicated structure. It's okay if you don't draw it. Plus 6O2, which stands for 6 oxygen molecules. 6 of these things. So this is our chemical reaction, but what about the energy transfer? The energy transfer in this reaction goes like this. Light energy is converted into chemical energy and stored inside the chemical bonds of the glucose molecule. So make sure you recorded all of the information from this slide. Pause it if you need to. And now I'm going to tell you about the details of this reaction. Where does photosynthesis happen? No surprise, photosynthesis happens in all green parts of plants, but especially in the leaves. And the leaves are specifically built for photosynthesis to happen there. So we're going to take a look at the inner structure of a leaf. Here's the inner structure of a leaf. I'm going to help you draw your own inner structure of the leaf in a moment. But there's 2 structures here that I want you to notice and you're going to record. First, just see what we're looking at here. Each of these rectangles, circles, and then shapes up here that has a blue interior and a green exterior, those are plant cells. So there's different shapes of plant cells here. Here's the top of the leaf. Here's the bottom of the leaf. And so we can see what's inside the top and the bottom. And inside each of these leaf cells, you might notice that there are these green circles. These green circles are really important for photosynthesis. You might already know what they're called. These green circles are called chloroplasts. Make sure you record this definition. Chloroplasts are organelles inside plant cells where photosynthesis happens. And the second important structure here that's actually too small to see a single one of, but you can actually see it in this picture in aggregate, a bunch of them together, is chlorophyll. Notice the spelling difference, not chloroplast, but chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green pigment or green molecule inside of chloroplasts that absorbs light energy. So take a moment, record these, and now I'm going to help you draw your own leaf. So here's how to draw your own leaf that we're going to be modifying in a moment. Oh yeah, before I move on, did you see what popped up on the lower left? Remember the stomata that we talked about last week? Those holes on the bottom of the leaves that open and close to let gases in and out? Well, you can see them in this picture, and they're going to be really important for photosynthesis. So let's draw a leaf. Here's how I drew it. Start by drawing the top of your leaf, and the bottom of your leaf should have holes in it because each of those holes are stomata. And now we need some leaf cells in between these areas. And you can draw it similar to how I have with some tightly packed cells on the top and some looser ones on the bottom. But it's up to you. As long as you get some leaf cells in between the top and the bottom, that would work. And you also need two tubes. I have my two tubes in two different colors. I would recommend that. And finally, notice that I put some green dots inside of all of my leaf cells. You remember what those are. The holes are stomata, and the green dots are the individual chloroplasts. And we'll label these two tubes a little bit later when they each come up. So here's the process of photosynthesis. And the reason you drew out this leaf structure is because you're going to draw the process of photosynthesis on this structure, along with writing it out step by step. So you're going to write down these steps, just like I have them on the screen. And then you're also going to draw what I draw on the screen. So step one of photosynthesis is carbon dioxide, abbreviated CO2, enters the leaf through the stomata. There it goes in. Step two, water, abbreviated H2O, enters the leaf by traveling up the xylem from the roots. So now we can label one of these tubes. I'm labeling the blue one xylem, and I can see water traveling into the leaf through this tube. Step three, CO2 and H2O are transferred into a chloroplast. So we need to get the CO2 and the H2O into a chloroplast. I'm using red arrows to show that they're both going into that chloroplast right there. And now we're going to zoom in onto that chloroplast. So you can feel free to join me in drawing a big chloroplast on another area of your paper. Label it chloroplast, and we're going to draw what happens in there. Step four, sunlight energy will be absorbed by chlorophyll. So here's our chlorophyll. You don't have to draw this full structure. You could just write the word chlorophyll and maybe draw a little circle inside of the chloroplast to represent the molecule. Sunlight energy is being absorbed by this chlorophyll molecule or chlorophyll pigment. And step five, this light energy is used to rearrange the atoms of 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules into one large glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. That was the equation that we wrote out at the start. We're going to rearrange these starting molecules, reactants, into these ending molecules, the products. And now I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. And your job right now is just to watch. You don't need to write out every move I'm making with these molecules. But what might be really helpful is if you can get some pieces, some objects to help you follow along with what I'm doing, and you can move them around as I'm moving them around, that would be awesome. So I'm going to be moving around atoms. And if you can find something to represent atoms like gumdrops or beads or jelly beans or pieces of paper that you have in different colors, 3 different colors, that would be awesome. What you're going to need to follow along with me, if you'd like to follow along with me, are 12, in my case, white items. And it's okay if yours aren't white. You can just choose any color as long as you're consistent. So 12 of these things. I've got 18 red circles and 6 black circles. So for me, black circles represent carbon atoms, red circles represent oxygen atoms, and white circles represent hydrogen atoms. And what you can see here are the reactants of photosynthesis. You should recognize this. We've got the first half of our photosynthesis equation right down here. 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 6 water molecules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus light energy, which isn't pictured. So we need to convert these reactants into our products. And the way that we're going to do that is first by just pulling them all apart. So I just got rid of all of the chemical bonds. Now they're all just individual atoms, like you can see here. Now's the perfect opportunity for you to just get a pile of your black, red, and white items or whatever colors you can use, and start rearranging them with me. So, what are we going to rearrange them into? Let's remind ourselves these are our products, what we're going for: one glucose molecule and six oxygen molecules. Okay, so I'm going to start by making the glucose molecule. And to do that, my equation says I have C6. That means six carbon atoms. So I'm going to take my six carbon atoms from the left side, the reactants, and move them over to the right side, the products. I also see in the chemical formula for glucose O6. That means I need six oxygen atoms. Let me take six oxygen atoms from the left, move them over to the right. And now I need H12, 12 hydrogen atoms. I'll take my 12 hydrogen atoms from the left, put them over here on the right. And I've actually carefully put them into the right positions so that if I just connect all of these atoms, I've made a glucose molecule. This is what your glucose molecule looks like. You might recognize this from last week. It's got a hexagon and some stuff kind of hanging off of it, but we typically represent glucose like a hexagon because of this internal hexagon structure. I'm not done though. I made my glucose, but I've got all of these leftover oxygen atoms. What am I going to do with those? Well, if I just kind of move them over here, you can see I can start pairing them up. And two oxygen atoms together makes an oxygen molecule. So I can connect those pairs of oxygen atoms together into six oxygen molecules. And now I did it. I successfully took all of the atoms that I started with and I moved them all over here into a new arrangement, my products. And remember, the atoms that we start with are the same as the atoms that we end with. They've just been rearranged. So I started with six black carbon atoms. I end with six black carbon atoms. You can do the math. You can see that all of the red oxygen atoms that we started with are still accounted for over here. We didn't add anything. We didn't take away anything. We just rearranged them. And so that was our process. Let me go through that one more time so you can see all of the rearrangements a little faster. I start with my carbon dioxide and water, break them down into atoms, move my six carbon atoms over, six oxygen atoms over, 12 hydrogen atoms over. That becomes a glucose molecule. I move my remaining 12 oxygen atoms over, stick them into six pairs, and those are my six oxygen molecules. And that's the whole process. So we've successfully made our glucose and our six oxygen molecules. What happens next? Well, back to the leaf. Go back to wherever your leaf diagram is. Now we're on step six. Step six, glucose is transported out of the leaf through the phloem. That's our other tube. And let's draw that. I'm drawing it in a purple arrow. My C6H12O6 glucose is moving out of the leaf into the phloem. And you know from last week that it'll move throughout the plant to our sugar sinks wherever it needs sugar. Step 7, oxygen leaves the leaf through the stomata. There it goes. Oxygen just leaves and it's out. And that's the process of photosynthesis. So our next section is what affects this process. Photosynthesis, a chemical reaction, can go at different speeds, and there's different things that affect the rate or the speed that photosynthesis happens, or when photosynthesis happens, or how fast photosynthesis happens. The first factor is one of the ingredients of photosynthesis: light. Without light, a plant cannot photosynthesize. That's one of the key ingredients. So the more light that a plant has, the more photosynthesis happens. And if you take a look at this graph, you'll see that the rate of photosynthesis will increase and increase and increase as light intensity increases until the leaf reaches its maximum rate of photosynthesis, the fastest it can possibly go. What's another thing that affects photosynthesis and how fast it goes? Well, the other ingredients, the other reactants. For example, the amount of carbon dioxide, one of our reactants. Without carbon dioxide, a plant cannot photosynthesize. It's one of the three reactants. So plants need to take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis constantly. How do plants get that carbon dioxide? Plants open their stomata to allow carbon dioxide to enter the leaf. Remember those stomata on the underside of a leaf? They open up so that carbon dioxide from the air can move into the leaf. And again, take a look at this graph. This graph shows us that as we give plants more and more and more carbon dioxide, the rate of photosynthesis increases and increases and increases until it reaches its maximum speed. Another ingredient that we need for photosynthesis is water. So it's not surprising. Without water, a plant cannot photosynthesize. Plants need to conserve water for photosynthesis. So remember last week you learned about transpiration, how plants are constantly losing water as it evaporates out of their leaves through the stomata. Well, to keep that water inside the leaf for photosynthesis, plants close their stomata to prevent water loss during transpiration. So think about the opposite effect we have here. Plants need to close their stomata to prevent water loss, but they need to open their stomata to let in carbon dioxide. So plants have a balancing act here. They need to open their stomata to let in just enough carbon dioxide, close it down as soon as they start losing too much water, open it up when they run low on carbon dioxide, close it down when they start losing too much water, and back and forth to keep the amount of water and carbon dioxide high enough for photosynthesis to happen. The last thing that affects photosynthesis, which is kind of interesting, is temperature. It turns out that there is a temperature sweet spot for photosynthesis. You can see it on this graph. Look how the rate of photosynthesis speeds up as it gets warmer and then falls as it gets colder. Right here, whatever this temperature is, this is our sweet spot for photosynthesis. If it is too hot, if we get too hot, photosynthesis will actually slow down and eventually just stop. If it gets too hot, we won't be able to photosynthesize at all. If it gets too cold, same deal. Photosynthesis will slow down, slow down, slow down, and stop as well. So think about what this means for photosynthesis in different biomes. What season would there be more photosynthesis in, less photosynthesis in? What about in a tropical desert where it's super, super hot? What about in the Arctic tundra where it's really cold? How does this affect the rate of photosynthesis? It's an interesting question. And the final thing that we're going to talk about is the purpose of photosynthesis. And I know it seems we should have talked about this at the beginning, but now you've got a better understanding of the chemical reactions and the energy transfers happening in photosynthesis. So it makes a little bit more sense to talk about the purpose. The purpose of photosynthesis is to make glucose. The end. The purpose of photosynthesis is to make glucose. This is really important to record and to wrap your brain around because a lot of students come in thinking that the other product of photosynthesis is the important one. You know the one I'm talking about. What else do we make besides glucose? Oxygen. And we humans breathe that oxygen, but that's really not the purpose of photosynthesis. The purpose of photosynthesis is to make glucose. That glucose is way more important. The oxygen is actually an unwanted byproduct. You can tell that it's unwanted because what does the plant do with it as soon as it's finished making it? It sends it right out of the stomata. And if it keeps that oxygen in the leaf for too long, it'll actually hurt the leaf. So oxygen is just a side effect, an unwanted byproduct. The real purpose is to make glucose. But why? What's the purpose of glucose? What is the glucose for? Well, some of the glucose gets used as food. And this is really, really, really important. That glucose, with all of the energy stored inside of its bonds, gets broken apart. And the energy is used to fuel all of the processes in the plant cells and in whoever's eating that plant as well. This process that I'm referring to is called cellular respiration. And that'll actually be the next topic that you learn about. Some of the glucose is not used as food, it's used as building materials. You learned this 2 weeks ago with biological molecules. Some of that glucose is used as a monomer to build complex polysaccharides like cellulose, which make the structures of the plant, and also starch, which is what plants use for long-term energy storage. Finally, let's connect this back to Unit 1 with food webs. Think about consumers. So we have producers, plants that make their own food through photosynthesis, and consumers, animals and fungi. Consumers can't make their own glucose, so they eat it instead. We've got a lion eating some prey. It's eating another animal, but that animal ate plants before this. And we've got a fungus consuming, eating a dead log. In both of these cases, these are consumers eating food to get access to some glucose. That means that our food webs that you saw in Unit 1, we said that these show the flow of food, but that's really the flow of energy. That energy was sunlight energy that was transformed in plants. It was transferred from light energy form to chemical energy form, which is one of those storage types of energy. That chemical energy was just moved from one body to another, moved into our prairie dog body, moved into our coyote body, moved into our golden eagle body. And in each of these bodies, our animals are going to be using that glucose for its chemical energy. They're going to be converting that chemical energy into the kinetic energy that allows them to move and breathe and live. And so, really, what we're seeing here is a complex flow of not just food, but the flow and transformation of energy. I hope you've enjoyed that lecture. Take a moment, go back, rewatch whatever you need to rewatch. Make sure your notes are super complete, and we'll see you all in a couple of days. Thanks for watching.